the number of disciples who were initiated before 1977 in ISKCON reduced from 4,500 plus to just. We will look at what happened to the rank and file devotees while the leaders ran amok like a wild elephant on a rampage in the unauthorized. Thousands of devotees were driven out from ISKCON. ISKCON was then filled with a handful of the GBC's God brothers who were yes men, and the rest of ISKCON was filled with new disciples of the unauthorized Diksha Gurus who were ignorant of the past and the reality. Several years, the rose-colored glasses fell off even the new initiates who began to see something literally that the emperor. This was one of the most glaring incidents of the crashing of ISKCON due to the unauthorized. He was writing a book called The Guru Business, which exposed the entire charade of the Gurus in ISKCON. By chance, if a stray voice here or there is heard, it is quickly and ruthlessly muffled with their age-old three-weapon strategy: intimidate, bribe, and expel. Hare Krishna, Vishwaguru Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Welcome back to episode 15 of the Excesses of the Zonal Acharya system, which is the third chapter in the ISKCON Files series. In the previous episode, we have seen some of the extreme deviations of Kirtanananda Swami, some of which had the blessings of the GBC. We have also seen how devotees, GBCs, like His Holiness Radhanath Swami and Devamrita Swami were completely hypnotized by Kirtanananda Swami, and they wholeheartedly supported his atrocious deviations, and eventually they returned to ISKCON to become Diksha Gurus and GBCs. We also saw how the GBC's faith in Srila Prabhupada is so shallow, how they don't consider Srila Prabhupada's instructions as eternal and absolute. Today, we will look at what happened to the rank and file devotees while the leaders ran amok like a wild elephant on a rampage in the unauthorized Guru system. The extensive and irreversible impact that the excesses and abuses of the Zonal Acharya system unleashed by the GBC on ISKCON is described in the article The Underground Hare Krishnas, which was published in Hinduism Today, September-October 1985 edition, which was barely about 7 years after the unauthorized Diksha Guru system was implemented in ISKCON. The article ran like this: out of 4,000 disciples, some sources say as many as 10,000 that Srila Prabhupada personally initiated into the Hare Krishna Bhakti sadhanas, only 12% or 500 are still official ISKCON members. You see, this is in 1985. Only 500 devotees were left. What happened to the 3,500 initiates who dropped away from ISKCON? Most couldn't sustain the sadhanas, the Hare Krishna niyamas and yamas: no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxicants, no meat eating, and the daily grind of rising early, doing japa, kirtan, chanting, puja, study, Krishna service. But there were many Prabhupada disciples who delighted in the sadhana, loved Prabhupada and his mission, but could not accept the new leadership, the successor spiritual masters. They either left or were expelled, even formally excommunicated. You see, this exodus of devotees is mentioned yet again in this article, From the Heart, Let Us Do Something, by Nityananda Prabhu in Vedic Village Review, dated May 1988. Droves of wonderful Prabhus were driven out of ISKCON camp in past years, including many prominent preachers and leaders. Some started their own movements, some joined the Sridhar Swami Mutt, some went into hiding, and others tried to carry on preaching in a new area. Many went back to material life, lost and whereabouts unknown, or wishing for the good old days when ISKCON was led by Srila Prabhupada. Actually, the GBC's diabolical strategy worked in ISKCON like a charm. Their intimidation, bribing, and expulsion strategy bore the fruit they aimed for. In less than 7 years from 1978, when the unauthorized Diksha Guru system was imposed in ISKCON by the GBC, the number of disciples who were initiated before 1977 in ISKCON reduced from 4,500 plus to just 500. And today it is even lesser. Thousands of devotees were driven out from ISKCON. ISKCON was then filled with a handful of the GBC's God brothers who were yes men, and the rest of ISKCON was filled with new disciples of the unauthorized Diksha Gurus who were ignorant of the past and the reality. There was no one to oppose or expose the unauthorized Diksha Gurus. The entire ISKCON was filled with ignorant and naive devotees who believed the stories these unauthorized Gurus had spun, and there was not even a whisper left in ISKCON that they were unauthorized. As a ramification of the excesses and abuses of the Zonal Acharyas, this continues even today in ISKCON. There is no one who knows the truth and raises a voice against the unauthorized Diksha Gurus in ISKCON today. By chance, if a stray voice here or there is heard, it is quickly and ruthlessly muffled with their age-old three-weapon strategy: intimidate, bribe, and expel. In Divine or Demoniac, Dhaneshwar Prabhu also describes the impact of this diabolical strategy of the GBC and the unauthorized Diksha Gurus. As predicted, an exodus began as dismayed and broken-hearted devotees realized they were powerless to rectify the situation. That exodus only increased over the coming years as the devotees were shocked and alarmed to see that those very persons who had taken control of the society and who were charged with protecting it were in fact bringing about its destruction. A hierarchy immediately developed in which god brothers and sisters who subordinated themselves to the 11 were offered perks, while dissenters were shown the door. The horror show was just beginning. Moreover, it was not just Srila Prabhupada's disciples who could see through the charade. Within several years, the rose-colored glasses fell off even the new initiates who began to see something literally that the emperor had no clothes. They too began to defect in large numbers. Within 10 years, the temples that were once bustling havens for enthusiastic transcendentalists were empty, and in places, the deities outnumbered the devotees. Such was the devastation of the society under the misleadership of the ultimate managing authority. This is extremely well captured by Dhaneshwar Prabhu. It was a well thought out plot to reward yes men with position and power and drive out the naysayers. This strategy has reaped rewards over the years for the unauthorized Diksha Gurus. And now today, if you look at ISKCON, there is not a single voice raised against the unauthorized Diksha Gurus from within. All that we can hear is a cacophony of voices trolling those who raise a voice against the unauthorized Diksha Gurus and constantly glorifying the very perpetrators of the torture and torment that ISKCON went through from 1978 onwards. What the GBC did in ISKCON was nothing less than an equivalent of an ethnic cleansing in ISKCON. These excesses of the Zonal Acharyas was not limited to only usurping Srila Prabhupada's position as Diksha Guru of ISKCON. There were other things as well. One devotee, Vishwaguru Prabhu, recollects in 11 Naked Emperors, sharing his memories as tobacco temple president. On another note, Bhavananda was the GBC for tobacco, but I didn't see eye to eye with him. He wanted to sell off the tobacco temple and give the money to New York ISKCON. I resisted his efforts to sell the temple. It was put on the market, but it did not sell. While the tobacco temple may not have sold, the New York Manhattan skyscraper temple did sell. There is this iconic picture of the Manhattan skyscraper temple from the top, with every window crammed with the devotees, each one craning his neck to see Srila Prabhupada, who was standing below on the ground. It is said that there were 300 full-time devotees in this one temple alone. After 1978, when most of the devotees were driven out for opposing the unauthorized Guru system, this temple became empty and was eventually sold, and the deity shifted from the swanky Manhattan location to a much smaller building in a modest neighborhood in Brooklyn. This was one of the most glaring incidents of the crashing of ISKCON due to the unauthorized Guru system. The reign of the Zonal Acharya Diksha Gurus was thus highlighted with brazen intimidation of those who opposed them or tried to expose them, shameless bribery with position and power of those who refused to be intimidated, and if both failed, with ruthless expulsion. And if someone did not become quiet even after that, the final resort was murder. The stark example of this was Sulochan Prabhu, who vehemently opposed the unauthorized Diksha Gurus and publicized the July 9 directive of Srila Prabhupada, which had been concealed till then. He paid for it dearly with his life. Sulochan Prabhu was mercilessly slaughtered in Los Angeles. He was writing a book called The Guru Business, which exposed the entire charade of the Gurus in ISKCON. He was not one to be intimidated or to be bribed, but he had to be silenced at all costs because he was jeopardizing the entire unauthorized Guru system in ISKCON. 2 bullets, just 2 bullets was all it took to quieten his voice. Although few devotees did get convicted in this murder, including Kirtanananda Swami, there were many who were co-conspirators who went scot-free, which shows how deep the rot is in ISKCON. The entire incident of the murder of Sulochan Prabhu is very elaborately captured in the book Killing for Krishna by Henry Doktorsky, very authoritatively. You are recommended to read this book, which has very authoritatively captured all the circumstances which led to the murder of Sulochan Prabhu. And you can also learn how Kirtanananda Swami was eventually convicted for this heinous crime and how one of his accomplices in the murder continues to remain a prominent Diksha Guru and GBC in ISKCON even today. This tyrannical mood of the Zonal Acharyas pervaded the entire organization, and even rank and file devotees unwittingly bought into the same culture, assisting the Zonal Acharyas in their outrageous actions, even up to the point of mercilessly murdering their opponents. The devotees did all this naively believing that they were exalted pure devotees and whatever they ordered was the order of Krishna. Sakshad Haritvena and Yasya Prasadat Bhagavat Prasado. And the whole situation was exacerbated by the GBCs who banned Srila Prabhupada's letters in ISKCON during those years. They did not allow devotees to read Prabhupada's letters because if they read Prabhupada's letters, Prabhupada's July 9th order would be out in the open and they would be exposed. So you can hear about this from His Grace Amayatma Prabhu speak about this. Listen to this.
On my personal journey, I had my share of bad experiences, not just with Rameshwar, but with a number of the new gurus, including Jayatirtha, Bhagawan, and Bhavananda. I won't share all those experiences here, but I will share several of the major ones and the ones that were directly related to this issue. One of them is how I came to know that the GBC had banned Srila Prabhupada's instructions in the form of his letters and important documents. In 1980, I left the LA temple and moved to Detroit temple along with the Fate Museum project as we were building another museum there. While I was in Detroit, Jayatirtha was the GBC there, and he wound up falling down and left ISKCON. I'm not even going to get started on that whole ordeal here, but in the chronological timeline section, I will mention more about it there. In the summer of 1984, my work in Detroit was over and I came back to the Los Angeles temple to update the control system for the LA Museum there, for the new one that I had designed for the Detroit. Rameshwar, for the second time, offered me that I could head up the Fate project. He had originally asked me to take over in 1980 when Bardraj was removed, but at that time I had declined it because I didn't think I could handle designing a new electronic control system, programming it, and producing the multimedia presentations with the soundtrack and all, and managing the whole rest of the project at the same time. But in 1984, Adidev stepped down from the project, and so Rameshwar again asked me to take the project over. I was considering it, as I knew how much Srila Prabhupada wanted the project, and I wanted very much to do that service with him. I just had some reservations about working under Rameshwar again. But at the same time, after moving back to LA, I joined a small group of devotees who met and discussed Varnashram Dharma. And within that group was an old friend of mine, Rabindranath, who is now the LA head Pujari. But at the time, in 1984, he was working with the BBT archives. One day, Rabindranath showed me and other devotees in our Varnashram meeting a stack of about maybe 200 or 300 copies of Srila Prabhupada's letters, which were sent to various GBC containing instructions by Srila Prabhupada regarding how the GBC was to manage ISKCON. This is the first time I had seen so many letters by Srila Prabhupada. Of course, Rabindranath would have had so many because at the time he worked at the BBT archives and had been in charge of filing the letters as devotees had been sending them into the BBT over the years in order to archive them for historical purposes. I want to relate what happened also just to give a little background to newer devotees so they can get a feel of what it was like for many of us Prabhupada disciples at that time and what nonsense we had to endure. In the 1970s, there was no digitized record of all of Srila Prabhupada's books, lectures, conversations, letters, etc. And in fact, copiers were not even a common thing in the 1970s. To get a copy, you had to go out to one of the copy shops, and they had the more expensive copying machines. So to get a copy of one of Srila Prabhupada's letters was not even easy, so it wasn't a common thing when Srila Prabhupada was with us. I recall one day in late 1973, I was in Karandar's office, and he was the GBC for LA then. He was one of the more advanced GBC members. And sitting on his desk with a stack of copies of Prabhupada's letters, probably not as big as the one Rabindranath had, but he was a leading GBC, and so he arranged to have a number of Prabhupada's letters copied for his own reference. In the 1970s, it was sort of prestigious amongst Prabhupada's disciples how many copies of Prabhupada's letters one had. I only had about 10 letters in my personal collection at the time, most related to the Fate project I was working on. But other than that stack that Karandar had, I had never seen, I was going to say hardly anybody had any more than about 20 copies of Prabhupada's letters, but I had never seen a collection of Prabhupada's that many letters until 1984 when Rabindranath showed us, his personal stack. So I immediately asked him if I could borrow them so that I could go make my own copies. He gladly agreed. My service with the Fate Museum project in 1984 was being funded by the BBT. And also another one of my really good friends back then was Rajendranath, who was in charge of the BBT at the time. Yeah, his name is Rajendranath, the director of the BBT, not to be confused with Rabindranath, who loaned me the letters, who also served at the BBT. Anyway, the BBT had a professional copier. So I took the stack of Prabhupada's letters there to make copies. I had the stack on the copier, and the machine had only started to just copy the first one or two of the letters when my good friend Rajendranath came in. He's the director of the BBT, and he asked what I was copying. My mood right then was like a small kid in a candy shop. I was so excited to have finally gotten my hands on so many of Prabhupada's letters. All excited, I told him, these are Prabhupada's letters, and I'm making copies for myself. I mean, just 7 short years earlier, when Srila Prabhupada was present, every ISKCON devotee would have been thrilled to the max to have access to so many of Prabhupada's letters. And so I was expecting that Rajendranath would share in my excitement. I didn't even stop to think that as director of the BBT, he would have technically had access to all of Prabhupada's letters in the BBT archives anyway. But instead of sharing in my excitement, Rajendranath got extremely serious, grabbed the stack of letters away, and asked in an alarmed tone, "Where did you get these?" I was taken aback by his reaction, but I told him that they were Rabindranath's copies. He let me borrow them so I could make my own. Rajendranath said, Rabindranath was told not to give copies of Prabhupada's letters to anyone. Rameshwar and I will deal with him later. He then told me, Srila Prabhupada's letters are off limits. Devotees are forbidden to read them. What? That was news to me. I had never even heard of that. And it was totally unacceptable. So I asked him what he was talking about. He told me that Rameshwar and Tamal Krishna decided that these letters, the Prabhupada's letters, devotees should not have access to him. And they met with the GBC to ban all of Srila Prabhupada's letters. No one was to have access to him. I asked why. first he gave me some preliminary reason about the letters were private correspondence and that many of the instructions Prabhupada gave were just for that one individual and not for the devotees in general. But I didn't even agree with that. But I assured him, no, not these letters. These letters, the ones Rabindranath gave me, these were not private instructions. These were Srila Prabhupada's letters written to the GBC members, where Srila Prabhupada was instructing them on how ISKCON was to be managed. Rajendranath got even more upset and told me, no, those letters especially are banned the most. Those are the ones that no devotee should have access to. That made no sense. I demanded to know why. I told him, these are instructions that all of Srila Prabhupada's disciples should have access to. All Prabhupada's disciples have a right to know how our spiritual master wanted his mission managed. As his disciple, it's my right to have access to the instructions and teachings of my spiritual master, but especially these. The GBC can't ban Srila Prabhupada's instructions, especially his instructions on how he wanted his mission to be managed. Rajendranath replied, all right, Amiyatma, I'm going to share something with you. The Rameshwar told me not to tell anyone, but since you're my friend, I'm going to share it with you. He told me there are two reasons. One, he said that Srila Prabhupada had given instructions in some of those letters to the GBC, and the GBC have not been able to follow them yet by 1984 due to various reasons. Someday they will, but right now, he said, they haven't been able to. So the problem will be if devotees read those letters and see that the GBC aren't doing what Prabhupada asked them or instructed them to do, they might rebel against the GBC and make it impossible for them to manage ISKCON. And second, he said that there were instructions that Srila Prabhupada gave in person, verbally, to the GBC in GBC meetings. And then he wrote a letter, but in the letter he didn't give the full instruction. He only gave part. The GBC knows the whole instruction because they received it verbally, but if the devotees read the letters that contain only part of the instructions, they will come to the wrong conclusions and think the GBC are not doing what he wanted. Again, devotees would rebel and turn against the GBC, and this could destroy ISKCON. Therefore, he told me that Rameshwar and Tamal met and decided that all of Prabhupada's letters had to be banned. And then he told me that the two of them met with the full GBC and this was agreed on. And so the BBT has to keep Prabhupada's letters away from the general devotees, especially the ones where Prabhupada gave instructions to the GBC on how they should manage. Rajendranath told me that he didn't like the idea himself, but they had convinced him that this was for the better good of ISKCON. And so he asked me to accept it as well. At the time in 1984, I didn't realize just how similar this was to this incident of preventing devotees from going to be with Srila Prabhupada in his last days. But years later, as I was rewriting the script, I could see it was actually the same thing. It was a pattern that these men repeated over and over. When Srila Prabhupada requested all the devotees to come to be by his side, these exact same GBC men, Rameshwar and Tamal, decided that if the devotees heard Prabhupada's request, it would lead to the total destruction of ISKCON. Therefore, they took all needed action to keep that request from being known. And now, some years later, these same GBC men came to the same conclusion using that same faulty logic and mindset and concluded that if the general devotees got access to Srila Prabhupada's letters, to his instructions on how he wanted his mission to be managed, these men were convinced that those instructions by Srila Prabhupada would wind up destroying ISKCON, thus to save ISKCON again. From Prabhupada's own words and instructions, these same men decided to take action to totally ban all of his letters. These men were just listening to their warped minds, and they had become convinced, and in turn convinced the rest of the GBC, that if the rank and file members of ISKCON were to read what Srila Prabhupada actually instructed us, his instructions, it would wind up destroying ISKCON. This again was complete insanity, and it was a total offense. Obviously, it was totally wrong. Well, I totally disagreed with what Rajendranath told me. I had no choice then but to let him take the letters away from me. Of course, it made me very curious to know what letters he was referring to and to know what instructions Srila Prabhupada gave in those letters that the GBC didn't want us to see. Also, it eerily reminded me that this was exactly what Rameshwar had told Bhardraj 6 years earlier in 1978. In 1978, Bhardraj had asked Rameshwar if he could see that list, that's what they were calling the July 9th letter at the time. He asked to see that list where Prabhupada wrote the names of the 11 men that allegedly were supposed to become actual gurus. Because Bhardraj wanted to see the list for himself, to verify that it was actually from Prabhupada, that this is what Prabhupada and who Prabhupada had selected. Again, Rameshwar at that time told him that that letter only was part of Prabhupada, only contained part of Prabhupada's instructions, and that Prabhupada had given verbal instruction to the GBC, the full instruction. And so if devotees just read just the list that he wrote, which was the July 9th letter, that Rameshwar told Bhardraj that devotees would be misled. And therefore that list, Rameshwar told Bhardraj, was just for the GBC to see. So this idea that the GBC agreed to ban Srila Prabhupada's instructions as he wanted the GBC to manage his society is just another example of how these GBC men thought at the time. How poisoned their minds had become, that they actually decided it was best for ISKCON that devotees don't have access to Srila Prabhupada's written instructions, at least in the letters. And if they did, it could destroy ISKCON. Such logic and such thinking, it's treacherous. It's bogus, spelt with a big capital B. The July 9th letter, 1977, wasn't the only document that the GBC didn't want the devotees to see. There is also the letter written on July of 1974, which I refer to as the utmost urgent letter. And there was the direction of management document written in the July of 1970 and others. The DOME, the direction of management, is a whole other issue. And I will cover that in a separate section. I have an ancillary note on keeping Prabhupada's instructions on the Ritvik Guru issue secret, which regards a recurring theme of the GBC, either not wanting to openly share or outright banning information about what Srila Prabhupada had instructed regarding the Ritvik Guru issue. I'm not sure when the GBC first banned Srila Prabhupada's letters, but I do know that it was in full force in 1984. Sounds Orwellian to me. In fact, it really sounds like 1984, which is quite poignant, as this incident took place in 1984. For those who don't understand the analogy, George Orwell was a somewhat political fictional author whose books often had a surrealistic nature. Thus the phrase Orwellian is used in such context. In 1949, Orwell wrote a book titled 1984, which described a world which was governed by an impersonal, totalitarian, suppressive government. And here, in the actual year, 1984, I find that the GBC had banned Srila Prabhupada's teachings in the form of his letters. Yes, it was Orwellian, and it was 1984 for real. It also reminded me of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. In that book, it told about a totalitarian government that banned all books. The state police took all books and burned them. Books were said to burn at 451 degrees Fahrenheit, thus the title of the book. And that describes a state government that forbids critical individual thought and inquisitive thought. These books, those books anyway, were required reading when I was in high school, and so both of them came to mind at that time. And they serve actually as appropriate examples of how totalitarian and suppressive the GBC were during those Zonal Acharya days. So much so that they not only banned just the July 9th letter, which they did actually, that's a whole other topic, way back in July of 1977, but they wound up banning all of Srila Prabhupada's teachings and instructions that were given in his letters. Obviously, this policy of the GBC changed after the Zonal Acharya system was dismantled, and then the BBT published a 5-book set of Srila Prabhupada's letters and eventually came out with the Veda base that hopefully contains everything that the BBT archives have.
So you see how the GBC tried to conceal information from the devotees to keep them in the dark. Today, of course, the intensity of these actions might have well been toned down, but the strategies of intimidation, bribery, and expulsion continue to this day to ensure that ISKCON remains firmly in the clutches of the rubber-stamped gurus, of the unauthorized gurus. Which brings us to the close of the 3rd chapter, Excesses of the Zonal Acharyas of the ISKCON File series.
Of course, we must add that women and children were one of the worst victims of the excesses of the Zonal Acharya debacle. Although we have not spoken about it in this series, it doesn't mean that the horrors of women and child abuse were any less. But it would take an entire series to cover those, because these child and women abuses did not stop with the Zonal Acharya system but continue even today with impunity. Devotees like Dhira Govinda Prabhu and Puranjana Prabhu, as well as devotee groups like Justice for Srila Prabhupada Foundation, have been fighting against these abuses, but with limited success or none at all. Women and children have borne the brunt of the unauthorized Vishwaguru system in ISKCON because they are the most vulnerable and susceptible victims of prey for the unauthorized Vishwagurus who wield absolute power and unquestionable authority and loyalty in ISKCON. And we are afraid that the horrific women and child abuse will continue unabated in ISKCON until the unauthorized Vishwaguru system in ISKCON is dismantled completely.
Before we close this episode and this chapter, we would like to pique your curiosity, if it already hasn't, that did not even one devotee rebel against the rubber-stamped gurus? Did no one take up cudgels for Prabhupada? Did all the sincere devotees meekly surrender to the GBC and their unauthorized Vishwaguru system? Were they all bribed to remain quiet? Join us in the next episode for Chapter 4, ISKCON Revolts Against the Vishwagurus. And this is the Chapter 4 of the ISKCON File series to know about this. And this Chapter 4, ISKCON Revolts Against the Vishwagurus, is the final chapter in the ISKCON File series. So please don't miss it. Those of you who have been with us so far on this epic saga, please do not miss it at any cost. Hare Krishna, Vishwaguru Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.